Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Wise Women Summit. My name is Patricia Lohan, and I am your host for this summit, summit. And I am delighted that you're here and tuning in to hear the incredible wisdom of the women that are working on the ground, helping people and sharing their knowledge and what they've invested in themselves and sharing their light. So this is just a great platform, and I hope you've had loads of inspiration already. Today is no different. We have the incredible and most wonderful Dolores Whelan, who I actually met a couple of years ago. And, you know, when I went looking for people for this summit, a few people came to mind, and then other people recommended others. And several people recommended Dolores, and then I discovered I actually knew her. So I'm just delighted to have Dolores on. She's an author. She's loads of wisdom, and I can't wait to hear about what she's going to share about the Samhain and the blessings today. So, Dolores, tell us a bit about yourself and how and what exactly it is you kind of do.
Well, I call myself a kind of an itinerant preacher in some ways, or a teacher, an itinerant teacher. My background is as a biochemistry lecturer, which I worked at for about 11 years when I left college. And I became increasingly aware that there was something huge missing in my life. I had a lot of things materially, but there was something missing. And I was involved in a lot of social justice issues. I was involved in politics. I was teaching. And all of those things were separate, and they never seemed to join up. And in 1983, I was living in Canada, in Edmonton, and I went to a workshop by somebody I didn't know anything about. His name was Matthew Fox, but I was inspired to go because the flyer said he was going to talk about bringing together spirituality and politics, spirituality and social justice, spirituality and creativity, spirituality and science. And all of those things were part of my life, but they had never come together. And when I went to hear him, it was like a light bulb moment. I just went, oh my God, I've been waiting to hear this unknowingly for all of my life. And I walked up to him afterwards and I said, I have to come and study with you. And he said, yes, you do. I've been watching you all day, and I can see that you really get what I'm talking about. And he was moving his program from Chicago to California. And that in itself was an incentive. I just spent a year in Edmonton in the freezing cold. I wasn't too sure I'd want to go to Chicago, but California sounded amazing. So I literally packed my life and drove my little car from Edmonton to San Francisco.
Wow.
And it began the most amazing journey. For 2 years, I studied with Matthew Fox, Brian Swim, Thomas Berry, amazing people. My mind was literally blown wide open away from the conservatism that I had grown up in Ireland vis-a-vis religion, the traditionalism around politics, and particularly around even science, because everything was very boxed. If you were a scientist, you didn't do certain things. You weren't an artist, and all of these things. And all of these boundaries became fuzzed for me in this amazing program where I learned to dance. I learned to paint my soul. I couldn't believe that, or I learned to attempt to do something like that. And I met the most extraordinary people. Many of them a lot older than me at the time, and who were just open to change. And after that first year there, I just knew I couldn't go back to a straitjacket education system. So I made this extraordinary decision to give up my pensionable permanent job. I did it while I was living in California. I probably wouldn't have done it if I was in Ireland. And I stayed for another year studying again at this program, but also learning other things. So I studied psychosynthesis, I studied massage and healing, and all kinds of things that would never have entered my awareness had I stayed in my comfortable job. And then I came back in 1985 when I had all my money was gone and I needed to come home. When I came home, it was quite a shock to my system. I mean, I thought I had fallen into the nether regions of the world because life back here was so different. But something deeper in me knew that I had to say, and it wasn't a masochism. It wasn't some kind of martyrdom. It was, I now would see it that my soul was calling me to stay here, because my mind had been so blown and my heart opened, and so many possibilities opened up for me while I did those studies, that I wanted to share that possibility with other people. That was my, if you like, mission statement. We didn't have that language, but that was what I wanted to do. And I wanted to do it because I had become so liberated. So if I could become liberated, so could anybody else. And so I started to offer courses in spirituality and healing through touch and in psychology-based courses. And later that year, a year later, we brought Matthew Fox to Ireland, and that started a whole movement way back in the end, towards the end of the 80s. And for the next few years, I was teaching courses based on his programs of what was called creation-centered spirituality. And creation-centered spirituality was based on the teachings of Meister Eckhart, who was a medieval mystic within the Christian tradition. Of course, he was also condemned and excommunicated, as you would expect. But his whole story was about that we are originally blessed, not that we come into the world as an original blessing. And that really, really threw my thinking upside down, and in a very powerful and positive way. And so with the creation-centered spiritual tradition, it was looking at original blessing, beginning with beauty, and then moving from beauty into acknowledging our pain, but embracing both of those, then being able to access the creative well within, and then using that creativity to transform both ourselves and the society that we were a part of. I found this an incredibly inspiring story, an incredibly inspiring way. And it wasn't just I who was inspired, because what was the greatest joy for me in those days was watching people open like flowers. It was just amazing. And I often think of the poem by Galway Kinnell. He says, "The bud stands for all things, even those things that do not flower, because everything flowers from within self-blessing." And that was it. It was this flowering from within because of an awareness of self-blessing. This was a huge, I suppose, countercultural idea in Ireland in the 80s, because we had been very, very caught up in, kind of shame and guilt and sin and all that kind of stuff. And, for those of us who are older, it was like trudging through Trika to try and get out of that mindset, out of that vibration. And so it took many, many years, I believe, for us to be able to get out of that place and to begin to see the world through the eyes of beauty and see us as divine creations, not original blots on the creation. So that was a lot of the work I did. Mm-hmm. It was very, very rewarding. And it was rewarding because, as I said, watching people open up. But there was still, I had started going to some of the sacred places in Ireland because I'm very connected with the earth and I just loved being out in nature. And in 1988, I was asked to accompany a Native American Indian woman called Deannie Wahoo with a group of people around Ireland's sacred places. And that was an amazing turning point in my life. Every time I sat beside Deannie on the bus, the tears ran down my face. They weren't tears of sadness. They weren't tears of joy. I think they were tears of recognition. And the recognition was something about being aware that for all this time I was out of touch with the deepest roots of my spiritual tradition, which was held in this country, in the land, and in the sacred places. And the tears were like quite unexpected, and I couldn't explain them for years afterwards. And later, about a week later, I went to the islands of Iona of Scotland and again had this amazing experience of this spirituality that was vibrant and that was palpable within the land and within the places there. So that began a whole new search, not so much that I was leaving creation-centered spirituality, but in fact, Meister Eckhart himself and Hildegard of Bingen, who was another, and Mechthild of Magdeburg, all of those people would have had some of their wisdom would have come from the early Celtic Christian tradition, which was like that which shone a light into the dark ages of Europe. And so they would have had a grounding in that. So what it seemed I was doing was going under that layer that had so inspired me to find the foundational layer underneath that, which was in fact the ancient spiritual tradition of this country. So it was like, and it has been, that was 88, and this is 2015, and that journey has been ongoing every day since then. I had the great fortune to meet Father Sean O'Dinn, who's a monk in Glenstone Abbey, and did a course with him for a week in Dublin in 1989. And that really whetted my appetite for what is the spiritual tradition of this country. And a deeper question was, underneath all the stuff about Catholicism, Protestantism, and all of that, under that Christian and quite divisive Christian story at that time in the 80s, is there an underlying deeper spiritual story awaiting to be recovered? That was my question. And I have discovered that in fact there's an amazing spiritual tradition that has been dormant in this country, but is now, over the last 100 years in a very special way, beginning to bubble up, to come through the music, through the poetry, through the plays, the writings, and now in the last 20 years, through the actual spirituality that is bubbling through all of many, many people in this country. It's like the soul of this country is beginning to awaken from 1,000 years of sleep. And Donovan, the beautiful singer from the 70s and 60s, he has a line which says, "When the truth is buried deep, beneath 1,000 years of sleep, time demands a turnaround, and so again the truth is found." And it's like we are becoming aware of the amazing, valuable and profound spiritual tradition that we have within this country and within our DNA, but it's coming through little by little by little. I went to Newgrange. I had the amazing privilege of having 2 tickets from Newgrange in 1986, the first time I was ever in Newgrange, going into the chamber for the solstice, and the sun came in. And to say it blew my mind is an understatement. And so I didn't have the language at that time, but what I realized was that because it was an extraordinary fluke, in inverted commas, that I was the person who got those tickets from somebody who couldn't use them. And why he chose to send them to me, I would imagine somehow it was the soul of Ireland prompted him, because he would have had many other people he could send them to. But I think when I reflected on that, I realized that in some way that visit to Newgrange was like an initiation into the mysteries of this country. But I didn't have the language for that. My consciousness wasn't evolved sufficiently to even be able to say those things. Mm-hmm. However, it profoundly affected me. And so it deepened my quest for knowing more about this country. And one of the ways that I have found it is by going to the sacred places, because they hold such a resonance of the sacred. And when we go there with open hearts and with out of our minds, if you like, away from the rational thinking, we get to experience that. So all of that was part of what I suppose was the quest I was on. And it wasn't like I didn't have a business plan and I didn't have it set out, because with this work, you can't do that. And I'm reminded of a line from David White where he says, "What we can plan is too small for us to live." I could never have imagined how my life would have unfolded when I came back from America exactly 30 years ago. And I couldn't have known what would have unfolded within me and within the psyche of the country. Because I see that quite now. When I started going to Newgrange, to Slievna and Old Castle, to Loughroot, to Castle Baldwin, the Brooklyn Mountains, to all those places, there was nobody there. except myself and a few other mad people, mad meaning making a difference. And, and so, but now you go to Lacrua, Slievna, and there's hundreds of people there. You go to Newgrange and there are hundreds of people there. And I think it was significant that Ireland chose to begin the new millennium from Newgrange at the time of the winter solstice, 1999, going into 2000. And that was a very significant choice that was made, that we go into this new millennium by going back to our ancient roots. And when we use the word Celtic, it's actually not really the right term, because Newgrange is not a Celtic building. It's 5,500 years old, so it's megalithic. And Sean O'Din, who was my great teacher and mentor, he talked about the Celto-megalithic culture that came from the merging of the megalithic culture with the Celtic culture, which then merged with the Christian culture. And so we have a constant evolution. And now the exciting thing for me is to see that it's also merging with so much of the insights coming from quantum science. This is amazing to me. Couldn't have known any of that. But one of the big pieces that has become a foundational piece of my work is studying the Celtic calendar. And the Celtic calendar is 3,000 years old. So that makes it about a good 2,000 years older than the Gregorian calendar. But the Celtic calendar emerges from the underlying philosophy, principles, a way of living, thought patterns, the cosmology of the people who created it. And what's interesting to me is that the Gregorian calendar is quite linear. And so we go from 0 AD to 2015 AD in a straight line. But life doesn't exist in straight lines. And no primal people ever describe life in straight lines. Neither do the Celtic people, or what we call loosely the Celtic people. So I started to study this calendar and discovered that it was an incredibly cosmological way of defining time, a cosmological way of defining us as human beings, not just confined to our little dramas, but within the cosmic setting that we find ourselves living. So this was a tremendous revelation. And so what I learned, and what I work with enormously now, was that there are 8 seasons in the Celtic year. And each season is approximately 42, 43, 44 days. And that there are 4 of the seasons, the seasons are all initiated by a festival at the beginning of the season. So the festival is a ritual enactment of the mythology underneath the season and the festival. So what I discovered, I mean, they knew it, was that 4 of the festivals are feminine and 4 of the festivals are masculine, which was a way of ensuring that the balance of both masculine and feminine energy was woven into the fabric of life. So Samhain, which is the festival the season we're in now, Samhain at around the beginning of November, because the feminine festivals are also associated with different phases of the moon. So they don't exactly start on the 1st of a month. So for example, the true Samhain this year was around the 8th or 9th of November. But that's only an aside. So so the festival of Samhain is the first and the most important festival of the year. And I'll just quickly walk through the seasons with you. So we have the festival of Samhain, which is the beginning of the year, and we start the year by going into darkness. The next one is the winter solstice, the moment of greatest darkness within the northern hemisphere. We then move to the season of Imbolc, also known in Ireland as Lá Éile Brida, the Bridget's Day, as the new light born at the winter solstice starts to grow. And then we have the spring equinox, usually towards the end of the equinox at the 21st of March, and it often coincides with Easter. We move on then to Bealtaine at the beginning of May, which is the crossover point from what's known as the dark half of the year into the bright half of the year. And Bealtaine is the second most important festival within the year. And Samhain and Bealtaine they are the energy of the gate into the dark and the gate into the light. And then we move to the summer solstice, and then to the festival of Lughnasadh, and back then to the autumn equinox, and back to Samhain. And it's like a river of different energies that is constantly flowing. So each season begins with an energy, a type of energy. And that increases until we get to the beginning of the next season, which takes that energy on, and so on around the year. So that it's like a river flowing. Each season, the energy flows from the season before it and into the season behind it or after it. And Samhain, as I said, is the most important festival. It's not only that it's the beginning of the year, it's the beginning of each new cycle. Because Halloween, which is becoming such a popular festival at the moment, and interestingly enough, I think it's coming back towards Europe from America, because they, with the trick or treat and all of that. But actually Halloween, the roots of Halloween are deeply embedded in the festival and the season of Samhain. So Samhain is the beginning of the dark half of the year. In the Northern Hemisphere, as we go into Samhain, we see the trees become denuded, the earth begins to draw its energy down into the center of the earth, and death and darkness are all around us. The evenings get very short, the nights are very long, the days are very short. And this continues right up until the winter solstice around the 21st of December, which is the time when darkness triumphs in the Northern Hemisphere. This is a time that we, as modern 21st century Western people, find incredibly difficult. We do everything to avoid embracing the season of Samhain. Yet what we learn from the season of Samhain is that there is no Bealtaine without Samhain. You cannot actually blossom in summer unless you journey in Samhain. So Samhain is the energy of surrender, of death, of darkness, of active waiting, of observing. It's the energy of being, and it's the energy of it's the feminine energy of being and beingness. Now, these are concepts which are very, very misunderstood, if they're understood at all within our culture. They are not values that they are not qualities, rather, that are valued in our culture, because our culture values brightness, doing, activity, external expression, gung-ho, yes we can, that kind of wonderful external expression, which is really, really important. However, what I have learned from journeying through the 8 seasons of the Celtic year, that unless we are able to go deep down into the surrender that is required by Samhain, as we touch into the place of being, not doing, of just having to surrender to what is. That is the place from where we find the wellspring of inspiration, which, when the new light begins at the winter solstice, that is the light that then grows as we move through the seasons and is expressed in the wonderful vibrancy and blossoming that is Bealtaine, and the ripening that is summer solstice, and the harvesting that is Lughnasadh. But we live in a culture that doesn't understand that. So the energy from Bealtaine to Samhain is the energy of the masculine. And it's particularly the energy of the young masculine. And it's the can-do attitude, which is really important. But what we discover from the stories in Celtic mythology is that in order to really become an effective creative person, an agent for true transformation, we have to marry that can-do, wonderful energy of the masculine with the energy of the dark feminine, which is the Cailleach energy or the crone. She is the energy that tempers that so that it is brought into balance, brought into harmony with what is possible. So, for example, if we just give an example of how everything went so out of balance in 2008, 9, 10, during those awful days, as they're in fact really important days, of when the boom that was totally and utterly unsustainable crashed. The reason that crash was very simple. We lived in the season from Bealtaine to Samhain and refused to enter into the period from Samhain to Bealtaine, where we would have understood the need for to integrate what we had achieved. So you have the expansion, which is wonderful, and then the natural follow of that is contraction into gather what we have produced, if you like, and gather it in such a way and let go what isn't necessary so we can find the next new cycle. But we didn't do that. All over the world, people said, this is great. This is wonderful. We can just keep on expanding. Well, the only things that grow like that nonstop are cancer cells. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting that we thought we were winning. And there's a story told from the tradition where Brez, who was the king of the Fomorians, and they were one of the people who would actually, I suppose, represent the physical material world. And they offered the king of the Tuatha De Danann, who would represent the spiritual dimension of consciousness, that they could actually have 4 seasons where they produced all the time. And the Tuatha De Danann, in their wisdom, said no. Spring for ploughing, summer for ripening, autumn for harvesting, and Samhain for resting. Because we need that balance. So a lot of my work at the moment is to work with how do we as individuals realize that we are part of a natural rhythm, we are part of a natural universe, and how do we learn to accept the Samhain period in the year, the Samhain periods in our own lives, the Samhain periods in a project that we're working in, and how can we learn to live with that balance that leads to harmony, deep creativity, and peace.
Oh, it's absolutely beautiful. And I suppose, I'm just listening here, just spellbound, going, I love everything you shared today, and I'm sure it's awakened a lot of insights for people. But certainly, just if we look at nighttime, the nights are so much longer, and it's an invitation to go to bed early, and rest nearly, and if we actually listen to that, the weather telling us and the season.
Yes, of course.
Go to bed early, it's really dark, and you want to tuck in, and you want to put more clothes in, and you want to hibernate.
And you want to eat more. Yeah, and you want to light the fire and pull the curtains. I've done that for 2 or 3 evenings this week, and it's been lovely,
Yeah. So this, I would say to people, from you, what would you say to people who are just kind of going, who are all gung ho all the time, and it's go, 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 go?
Can't hear what you're saying very well. Sorry.
I would ask, what would you say to people who are in that mode of go, 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 go?
Okay. I would say, because can I tell you that I was one of those people, go, 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 and I still find it easier to go than to not to go. I think what we have to understand is that in order to, you see, here's the thing. We're used to making a lot of effort, but the effort is because we're not paying attention at a deeper level. So we end up doing a lot of unnecessary stuff. Whereas if we were quiet and listened, we would find the next step much more easily. But what would I say to people? Because like, I didn't arrive at this. I'm in my 60s. I was a fairly slow learner about this process. And I was brought to it kind of kicking and screaming. It wasn't like, this is great, I don't want to do anything. Because we get our identity from doing. Because we live in a world that values what we produce, what we do. So I think the key to this is to remember, and I remember Meister Eckhart, remember this I studied him for a long, long time. He says, to the person who is aligned with God or the divine, they are always in the right place, whether in activity or stillness. So it's how do we understand that the doing, the external doing, is one aspect of our lives, and that it is fine, it is really good for us to be in non-doing from that. But I think it just takes courage, it takes practice, but it basically takes a love of self. Because if I only love myself, I mean, John Bradshaw in his work, Healing the Shame That Binds You, he said, in truth we should be called human doings, because instead of human beings, because we only see ourselves as valuable when we do. And I think there's the key. Can I love myself, accept myself in my being non-productive? Yeah. I remember after my whole life had fallen apart in 1997, and people said to me things like, do you know what, Dolores, just keep busy. But thankfully, I was so exhausted, I couldn't keep busy. So when people used to say to me, what are you doing? And I'd say, not very much, because I wasn't able to. And for many people, they experience the season of Samhain really when they become very ill, or they lose their relationship, or they lose their job. And in a way, it's like there are other easier ways to experience it by surrendering to what is.
Mm-hmm. And actually, we had Sarah Hanrahan, the osteopath, speaking earlier, and I said, "Well, what do you normally tell your clients? Like, what would your client?" She said, "Rest, and rest even more."
Yes, and you see, sorry.
But because normally, and I was exactly that. I said to her, "Well, what can I do to make this go away quicker?" And she said, Do nothing.
Yeah, do you know, and that's the other thing in medicine, and when everything's wrong, we see every illness as why did this happen to me? Well, you know what? The soul doesn't care too much about the personality's wants. The soul will do what the soul needs to do. And, the work of Byron Katie, and I love her work, she says, we suffer when we argue with what is. Mm-hmm. It's not the illness that makes us suffer. It's us thinking we shouldn't have it. So it's like, stop fighting with reality. And when we fight with reality, we suffer. Now, I mean, I'm really learning about how to inhabit these statements in every moment of my life. And sometimes I get it right and sometimes I don't. But I do know that this is the only way in which we are going to create a more harmonious personal life, family life, community life, and therefore global life. Mm-hmm. Change happens at the most fundamental levels within each one of us as we make different choices. That's one of the great, great gifts that we humans have, free will and the power of choice. But our choices can be limited by our thinking. So challenging our thinking allows us to make more appropriate choices. Yeah, more appropriate choices.
Thank you. Oh, wow. I don't know where to start with that. I think that everybody will have so much food for thought and little aha moments during exactly what you, and it just flowed from your soul and your heart, and it was absolutely beautiful. I think everyone will agree that Dolores blew me away. I just love that you're obviously being a beacon of light in the spiritual world in Ireland since you arrived home
30 years ago.
30 years ago.
Yeah.
And thank you for being part of the Wise Women Summit. I'm sure everybody really enjoyed your beautiful message today, and to share, to learn more about what Dolores does, and maybe connecting with her courses or the books that she's written. Her information is on this page, so you can follow her on Facebook
and website www.doloreswhelan.ie, and Facebook is doloreswhelan.ie.
Yeah. Brilliant. And thank you, Dolores. Thank you, everybody, for watching this. And, you know, if we take many insights away from today, but like honoring Samhain and giving yourself a rest and going in and enjoying this time to just be, definitely be my takeaway from it. So everybody who's listening, don't forget, if you enjoyed this, please share the Wise Women Summit with anybody you think that may be interested in it. It's an amazing resource. The women have really opened their hearts, just like Dolores, and I'm delighted to have you here. So we're very grateful for you and share. And thank you so much. So we will see you at the next interview. There's so many more incredible women. And it's so great that there's so many of them here in Ireland as well, and that they're really accessible. So we'll see you at the next interview. Bye for now. Bye.
Thank you, Patricia, and thank you for inviting me.
Okay. Very welcome. It's my pleasure.